Hey Optimancers, Chris here. So I had a request to take a look at a new video that is out where Jeremy Crawford is talking about some of the future design for Dungeons and Dragons and Sage Advice. So let's get into it.
To those that do not know.
So Sage Advice is a question and answer column, basically. Well, at least it started as a column in Dragon Magazine many decades ago, where people would send in rules questions and then get an answer from the people who made Dungeons and Dragons. So we have carried on that tradition over the years. And whoever is responsible for Sage Advice is called the Sage. And so now we're going to do that here, where you ask me a question, maybe it's your own question or a question that has bubbled up from the community, and I give an answer. Now, there is important context here. Sometimes when rules answers are offered by our team, and in the last 7 or 8 years, that's usually me giving the answers, there can be sometimes this feeling that, oh, because this answer came from the team that makes Dungeons and Dragons, this must be, like official with a capital O and a TM after it.
Yeah, you showed up at my house a lot. Like, like when I get a rule wrong and I'm running a game.
And so what's really important context for anyone joining in and listening to our conversation is, yes, these are answers coming from the official makers of Dungeons and Dragons. So from that standpoint, the answers themselves are official. But it's the context for any rules discussion we have is that in D&D, each group determines how it is going to deploy the rules in service to their campaign, to their taste, to what gives their group joy. And anything we say here, again, even though it has that glimmer of officialdom, still it's just a tool, an additional tool in a group's toolbox for the DM and the players to consider as they decide how are we going to make use of the various tools that D&D offers for us to go on our heroic adventures and weave a story together. So nothing that we say in these videos or that we say in our Sage Advice Compendium PDF is ever meant to override a group's own choice, guided by that group's dungeon master, in how to use the many tools that D&D offers.
I'm going to pause it there for just a sec. I agree with what he's saying, but just to point out that this is true of any rule, right? So you have a rule in the player's handbook. You can choose whether to use it or not. It's between you and your DM and your people in your table. I use house rules myself, and so those are going away from what the player's handbook tells us we are supposed to do, because you have a social contract with the rest of your table to kind of play the same game. And so Sage Advice, I find it very useful because sometimes I'm not sure how a rule is supposed to work, and I want to know. So Sage Advice might tell me what they intended for the rule to do. And also communication with players, because sometimes a player might have a view on how a rule is supposed to work, and I have a different rule. It's helpful to know, if the designers have weighed in on how that rule was supposed to work. It's good to know that, and it can help us resolve that difference of opinion.
I often like to use this word tool because I think of D&D as this storytelling toolbox. And each group decides, they open up the toolbox and it's like, this week, are we using a hammer or a screwdriver, or how did the spatula get in here? And the group decides, again, with the DM as sort of the chief tool user, how to use each of these tools and how much, because each group's tastes are different. Each group has different levels of mastery of the game. And so sometimes a group might decide, we're going to ignore some of this simply because we're just learning the game right now. Other groups, their joy is playing exactly the way the rules are written and in line with what the designers intended. So for those groups, they're going to listen to every word said here. And if for that group, gives them happiness, then awesome. But for another group,
Yeah, so I just said I don't play by all the rules as they're written. I tend to do house rules. I've done videos on what house rules I use and why I use them. But when it comes to things that aren't in the house rules, I do like to know exactly how things work. This is largely, of course, why I have this channel, to try to help us navigate together through how the rules are supposed to work. And, it is very helpful. I am very glad there is sage advice. It is a source of happiness because when it comes to rules that we're not totally sure how they were supposed to work, we often talk about, well, I think it's intended to work this way, or I think it's intended to work this way, even if it's not worded in exactly that way. And it is helpful when the designers just tell us, yes, that is how it is intended to work. And the vast majority of cases, we don't have that. And then what we can end up with is two different players who think that the same rule was intended to work two different ways. And we don't know. We don't know what the designer's intent is. So then we have to work that out ourselves. But if the designers have weighed in, then it just makes that easier and we get resolution much more quickly. So I'm very appreciative that they do sage advice because it helps me at my own table. I get that it's not for everybody. So if you are playing in a group and you look at sage advice and you don't like what they said, you can ignore it. It's no big deal. But I do find it helpful. It is a good way to improve my communication with my players and to make sure we're all on the same page. Because we're playing a game, we want to play by the same rules.
They'll listen to what we say and say, yeah, that's nice, Crawford. And then go on and do what they want to do. And I think that's also awesome because ultimately it's about supplying as many tools as possible for people to create the D&D experience they want at their table.
We're not like the D&D paladins knocking at your door, riding out into neighborhoods, making sure everyone's playing D&D the exact proper way.
Exactly, and it's actually quite the opposite. And I'm going to get serious for a minute. I get legitimately sad anytime I see in public people waving the rules at each other, and even worse, waving something I or another member of the team has said about our design intent and whatnot. I get super bummed because, again, these are meant to just be happiness tools. These are not meant to be weapons to be wielded against each other because at the end of the day, this is a co-op game and a group decides together how they're going to play it to essentially optimize for their amusement. And so, nothing we say here should.
Yeah, and he's just basically saying, don't tell other people how to have fun. And I agree with that. For me, sage advice is a useful tool for me and my players. We're not using it in a negative way against each other. We're using it just to understand the rules better, and I appreciate its existence.
Should ever be used as a weapon unless it's like a Nerf weapon and it's just making people giggle.
Or it's a bioweapon. That brings me to, I have questions.
Yes, please.
So,
hit me with them.
Backgrounds. Since Strixhaven, the curriculum of chaos, it feels like backgrounds have become a little bit more powerful.
So, yes.
Okay, so I'm interested in his response to this because there's been a lot of speculation that I've been a part of where we see the backgrounds now tend to involve a feat and sometimes more than just a feat. Like the Strixhaven backgrounds actually give you access to a bunch of different spells that you might not have access to in addition to a feat. And I am really curious because a new player's handbook is coming out. And ultimately, I don't like it when some backgrounds are super good and other backgrounds aren't super good. But if they are going to redo the player's handbook and they're going to follow the same design intent, I think it's really cool to have backgrounds tied to or to have feats tied to backgrounds, or anything else tied to the backgrounds for that matter. Yeah, I'm curious if he's going to discuss if this is something that's going to happen in the new player's handbook.
In Strixhaven, we introduced a background which represents your character being a starting student at that magic university. And in that background, inside the feature, and every background gives you a special feature, it's usually more flavor than anything else, we give you a free feat. That's unusual.
Yes.
That definitely gives that background more teeth than a background typically has. Now, that is actually in line in terms of power with our other Magic the Gathering books, where in each of the worlds we give a character who's built for that world the ability to gain a source of power that is outside class or race and the other things in the game that power up a character. In Guildmaster's Guide to Ravnica, we did that with your reputation with a particular guild. In Mythic Odysseys of Theros, we did that with building up your piety with a particular deity. In Strixhaven, we decided to go with a much more sort of direct approach, which is you get a feat. Now, people have noticed in a recent Unearthed Arcana we released that there were also backgrounds in that Unearthed Arcana that gave feats.
I noticed as well.
He's being mysterious here, but he's talking about the new Dragonlance Unearthed Arcana. They're working on Dragonlance, and the backgrounds that are in that Unearthed Arcana all give a feat as well. And this has just led to even more of the same speculation.
And so this is definitely a design theme that we are keenly pursuing because what this does is it allows us in a very elegant, targeted way to give a background a little extra oomph that says something about that background, not only story-wise, but it gives the background a little mechanical toy that you can actually see in play later on. Because one of our own critiques of our background design over the years is that while they give you some proficiencies, which absolutely can see play over the course of your character's adventuring life, it's very easy for the background to just sort of vanish as a meaningful part of who the character is, unless the DM really engages with it as a storytelling sort of inspiration, a way to feed the campaign with different little, perhaps quests or NPCs related to a character's backstory.
And is really like actively involved. Like if you're the pirate and you can do something like steal someone's drink and people will just...
Now, he might just outright say what's going to happen in the player's handbook here, but I think it's pretty clear from what he's saying that they're not very happy with the way backgrounds were in the player's handbook, and that these are like intentional changes that are going to be part of design moving forward. So I think it's pretty clear from what he said already that we should absolutely expect backgrounds in the new player's handbook to all get a big boost, just like we've seen with backgrounds up to now or in the last number of months. And yeah, that's great. I'm so glad to see backgrounds become more important. The other thing I note here is that because they're tying feats to backgrounds, you kind of wonder, like, are feats even going to be optional in the next player's handbook? Because now I'm wondering, maybe they're not. Maybe it's just going to be a standard thing. Feats are just assumed to be used. And that actually, I don't know. Some people will like that and some people won't. I do. Or I always use feats anyways. But yeah, I'm not sure if every gaming table will be happy about that if that happens. I'm just speculating.
just kind of back up because
Right.
they're scared of you, that kind of stuff. coming up often.
Yeah. But you'll see in many games, the background just sort of fades.
Right.
Now, part of that is on purpose. It's called a background. It's behind you. So we're not interested in background sort of elevating to the same level as class. Class is the most defining element of a person's character, but we're exploring how can we give it just that little something extra. And so we're doing that right now in our setting design of having these special world-specific backgrounds that give you a feat that gives you that something extra. And people can expect to see us do more of this as we explore this design space. This is a great example of how alive our game is, that we are always exploring ways to bring new ways to have fun, new ways to optimize the play experience, looking for fresh ways to make the game easier to learn. For us, it's sort of like the game is never done. It's constantly evolving. Part of this comes from we're a game design team. It's our job to look for ways to constantly improve the game. But it also arises from the fact that our team is filled with people who are DMing and playing D&D constantly, and just through our own play, we're discovering things that, hey, this is working for us in our home game. What if we brought this to the official game?
Right.
And sometimes we'll also do experiments like we did in Strixhaven. And then if they catch on, if we notice people are liking this, or we are discovering, it was a mine where at first we thought, well, there's just a little bit of ore in there for us to mine, but we started digging and discovered, oh no, there's way more potential here. We think there might be gemstones in here. Then we will do what people are now seeing as of the most recent Unearthed Arcana, where we take this design theme and we start iterating. We're like, okay, how far can we go with this? And so again, people can expect to see more of this exploration in the future.
There's also something I've seen is what many would call feat stacking. Two feats are related to each other. I actually rather miss this. So can you tell me a little bit about that?
Okay, so what he's talking about is feats that build off of other feats, or maybe have requirements of other feats in order to take. This is not new design. We saw this in 3rd edition, where you would have a feat, and in order to take it, you would have to have another feat beforehand. And yeah, we saw this in Strixhaven for the first time in 5th edition. So let's see if it's something that they're happy with. I think Strixhaven is new enough that I think at this point he's going to be pretty positive about that. So let's see what he says.
Yeah, we also in Strixhaven, in addition to having this background that you could take that gave you a feat, we then introduced a second feat that you could take, but you had to have the previous feat to take it.
Right.
This is something that we also wanted to start exploring because we felt that, first off, feats are a very useful place for us to explore what are essentially class features not tied to a class. We as designers, that's basically what we think of a feat as. It's a classless class feature. And we wanted to be able to provide this feature option to Strixhaven characters that was going to have a bit more oomph, a bit more power than a typical feat. And so for us, the natural way to do that was, well, put a level prerequisite on it, and because we wanted to tie together sort of a narrative connection between them, also require you to have the previous feat. This is really useful because it creates a way for us to give you options that have different levels of power. We can give you lower level power, higher level power, and give you also the sense of going up a little sort of narrative ladder.
Yeah.
It's optional. If you get the background and you get the free feat, you don't have to take the second one. But if you decide to invest in it, that's a fun little character development path that we're inviting you to go down. Because one of the pieces of feedback that we have gotten about the game since its release in 2014 is that especially our heavily invested players and people who've played a lot of different characters, who are always looking for something new, would like a few more ways to sort of turn the dials on their characters. And these feats.
I hope they're listening to that because, yeah, for sure. There's certain feats that right now are just the choices, and you take them right away when you're making that style of character. And next time you play that style of character, you're going to take the exact same feats, probably at the same points. But what would be really nice is if we had other feats that would also be effective. So then we could play the same style of character 2 times, and maybe we're going to look at different feats each time we play.
That build on each other, that's one way to do it. This is also a space that we're continuing to explore because, again, we also introduced some feats like this in our most recent Unearthed Arcana because we also view this as very fertile design ground. Now, in 3rd and 4th edition, we did this as well, where you had feats that would go in a chain.
Yeah.
Now, we also got very clear feedback back then that people grew weary if the chains grew too long.
Yes.
or to use the stacking metaphor, if the stack got too high. So we're keeping that in mind as we explore this space, that it's unlikely that any of these chains will ever get, you're not going to have like 10 feats in a chain. But there is a space for us to explore, just like you have class features where you get a lower level one and then a higher level one, exploring having these essentially class agnostic features that also can have levels, and that again opens the opportunity for us to create ones that would be more powerful than we would ever want a generic feat to be.
Yeah, this isn't getting back to mapping out your entire career ahead of time before you're like when you're at first level. I have to take all these feats in this order, kind of thing.
Right.
Back in that.
I mean, that's exactly the way it worked. Is you would have to map out your character far more carefully in 3.5 than you do in 5th edition, because there would be a specific feat you would want, and you had to do certain things in order to get that feat. Now, what I'm seeing here is, and they're basically saying they wouldn't go for that kind of length in terms of chains of feats, but there's still going to have to be pre-planning, because if the feat that you can only get at level 6 is more powerful than the feat that you could have gotten at level 1, well, then we're going to be looking at those feats and what we need to do in order to get them, and that is going to require planning ahead.
Yeah, I mean, because right now what we've shown is it's basically you get the starter one,
Yeah.
and then there's another one you can pick, or there are 3 you can pick from, and we're going to keep exploring. This is what things like Unearthed Arcana are for. We are just about to release the survey for the most recent Unearthed Arcana, so we're going to get more feedback on this. We know people really enjoyed that little feat chain. It was 2 whole feats in Strixhaven.
Right.
And so we're going to keep exploring and keep getting feedback and seeing how these play out in people's campaigns.
Okay, so my take there is, so with the backgrounds, I think he was really clear that they're really happy with tying feats to backgrounds, and that's probably something that we will continue to see. Here with the feat chains, I think he's still a little bit waiting to see how it turns out. It's kind of an experiment. So maybe we'll see them and maybe we won't, depending on how much players seem to enjoy them. So that one, I think it sounds to me like he's a little less certain on that one. But, it does sound like something they're at least considering might be happening in the future, and that would include the next player's handbook.
I've noticed that existing elements within the game you've started to utilize in different ways. So like proficiency bonus in Tasha's was very common as a way to be like, you can use this ability equal to the amount of your proficiency bonus, which is a very elegant solution of telling people how often they get to do something. I noticed recently hit dice are kind of being more involved in the mechanics of D&D with some of these experiments.
Yes, something that we, especially starting a couple of years ago when we began work on Tasha's Cauldron of Everything in earnest, one of the design goals that I gave the team working on that book was for us to look for ways to use things that are already in the game in new and interesting ways, not just for the sake of the novel, oh, it's a new thing, which can be fun. I mean, all of us who are gamers enjoy, the new shiny.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm obsessed with the new shiny.
But there's a more important goal there, and that is for us to discover ways to use things that are already on people's character sheets, that they've already learned how to use for other purposes. Because the more that we can lean into design that already exists, the easier the game is to teach, to learn. It also makes it easier to balance things because there are these, certain things that are known quantities, like the proficiency bonus. Like we know, regardless of class, that if a character is X level, its proficiency bonus is equal to Y, and then we can balance for that. So now we're doing a similar thing, like you pointed out, that we started in Tasha's with the proficiency bonus, which is now starting to appear all over the place. We're doing the same thing with hit dice because we have felt that the hit dice option of spending it when you take a short rest to get some of your hit points back is interesting. But if we're going to teach you about that, my feeling as a designer is there's more we can do with that. One of the tests I pose to all of our rules is there enough fun being generated by the complexity we're presenting? That the ratio to me, like the more complex something gets.
I have been hearing for years, and I agree, that, hit dice, they sit on your character sheet, and players wish they had other ways to spend them. So I'm totally on board with new ways to spend hit dice.
The more we're asking of our players and DMs to learn, the more I feel like there needs to be more fun coming out the other side. Because otherwise, why are we asking people to learn this? And so that's another reason often why I'm looking for how can we make the thing that's already there do more and bring more fun and cause you to look at the game in new ways. I think there was kind of an aha moment for us when we figured out this new way of using proficiency bonus. And then I really enjoyed watching the D&D community have, then once it was out in the book, this aha of, oh, this makes total sense. They could have been doing this all along. And I think we're going to see a similar thing in the months ahead as we start exploring more and more ways to use hit dice and other elements of the game. Because again, this is a perspective we're.
Okay, so we're going to see more stuff for spending hit dice, and he hints that there may be some other things that are currently in existence on your character sheet, and you're going to have new and interesting ways to spend them. So I am very curious what those are going to be.
Bringing,
if you have a guess,
to
give me a post.
Basically, anything on your character sheet, we are looking at it and it's like, all right, is this piece doing enough? Is there something else we're doing in the game that we can actually hand to this? And then the whole game gets tighter, easier to teach, easier to learn, more fun to play, easier to balance, new customization options, etc. All of those are factors that we're looking for when we start doing these tweaks and these explorations.
Thank you very much, Jeremy Crawford, for being our sage. That is our episode of Sage Advice.
Okay, so that's it. I have to say, I was pretty pleased with pretty much everything Jeremy Crawford had to say there. I agreed with him on the points he made, and I agree with him on moving things like feats into backgrounds, though I was always concerned that, if you're going to put feats in Strixhaven, then not feats in the player's handbook backgrounds, then why would you ever take a player's handbook background if the Strixhaven ones are available? But if we get to the point where all feats or all backgrounds have a feat, then I'm totally on board. I think that's really cool. And I love the idea of feats being a little more interesting. And I like the idea of chain feats. I think if you carry them, even one extra feat, so if you have a feat and then you need it to get one other feat, yeah, we're going to want to plan ahead more than we do now in order to get those. Of course, I already plan ahead, so it's not really going to make a difference for me, but I could see it making a difference for a number of players, especially if those feats are significantly more powerful than the feats you get before. You will see a greater variance between characters that are not being planned ahead and those that are in terms of power level. And in an optimization community, that's not really a problem because we're all kind of planning ahead. But if you start mixing the non-optimizers and optimizers, the power levels of characters will be even a bigger divide than they are now. And they're actually fairly big now, but we'll see that even more, I think. But it is more fun to make characters that, when planning ahead, you can do these kind of neat things. So, yeah, I'm pretty much on board with everything they said here. So thank you for the suggestion to react to this because, yeah, I really enjoyed the video and I liked what Jeremy Crawford had to say. And I'm looking forward to it. And I'm always glad to be looking forward to new things. So thanks for joining me. Otherwise, till next time, I'm going to sit back, relax, have some fun. D&D's for everyone. Thanks, everybody. Talk to you again soon.